This is the Watchman, giving another clarion call. Now, we all knew that Greece was a troubled place these days, sure, but this week things just went full-on Twilight Zone. What just happened this past week is that the Greek government, Syriza, having exhausted nearly all its options, having run out of cash reserves, having already taken much of its country's pensions, just to stay alive and keep their head above water for a week longer, had to come up this week with another 750 million euros to make a payment to the IMF, or basically default. Now, everyone wondered just where on earth they were going to get that kind of cash. I mean, who's dumb enough to give them any more money at this point? Everyone knows that Greece will default and then be forced with it to leave the Eurozone either through popular vote or through the Brussels boot. Now, personally, would you give any cash on loan to someone like Syriza or the Greeks if you personally knew they were about to default? No. No one in their right mind would do that, right? Well, not exactly. You see, as it turned out, the IMF is now just as desperate as Syriza is, because the news hit the wire this week that the Greek government, in order to repay the IMF, actually opted to borrow 650 million euros from, drum roll please, the IMF! Yes, that's right. Syriza withdrew 650 million euros from the IMF's reserve in order to repay 750 million euros to the IMF. If that wasn't loony enough, get this. Any cash borrowed from the IMF reserve must be replaced within 30 days. That's right, a mere month. So what has happened is that the IMF has taken it upon itself to pay itself on behalf of Athens, and now has to bite their nails and worry about how Athens will repay them for having paid their bill in a month's time. Meanwhile, the rest of the payments that Greece owes are all coming down the pike like a freight train over the coming weeks. So, what's really going on here? Brothers, everybody knows that Greece must default. Everybody knows it now. The IMF knows it. The ECB knows it. Greece knows it. Brussels knows it. Greek pensioners, whose money has basically all been taken, all know it. No one's pretending that this game can continue any longer now. So the question is, what was this action truly all about? Why wasn't the default allowed to occur on May 12th when that payment should have been honestly defaulted on? What is Syriza up to? Why would they bother with that loan if they and everyone else knows how this horror story must inevitably end? Well, here's what I believe is going on. Have y'all ever played the game Hot Potato? Okay, good. Most of us have. For those who haven't, here's a quick refresher. It's a very simple game. People sit in a circle, and then something representing a potato is passed around from person to person. Everyone wants to get rid of it as soon as possible, because when the timer runs out, whoever is holding that potato is the loser. So everyone who gets it tries to pass it off as quickly as possible to someone else, hoping that when the timer runs out, they won't be holding it. That's all they have to do is not be holding it to win. Now, this whole Greek tragedy for the last 5 years or so has been one giant game of hot potato. Everyone in the European scene has been forced to play along with this sad little game because they were all basically involved with the same monetary experiment, the euro. Now, sadly, though, once it was known just how bad things truly were in Greece, everyone has always known the ending, though they publicly pretended that they thought there were other alternate endings. There weren't. Default was always always the end game. The Greeks were never going to be able to repay the sum of cash they were loaned. Mathematically, it was an impossibility. Now, in the early days of this hot potato game, say 2010, 2011, and even early 2012, folks could afford to pass around that potato nonchalantly. They knew there was time left in the game. But now, in May of 2015, as Europe admits it is preparing a plan B for Greece, as Germany gives the green light for a Grexit or even a referendum for Greece on whether or not to stay or to leave the EU, everyone knows the ending, which of course hastens the coming of that ending. And therefore no one wants to be holding this potato when the game ends. Now, what is this potato in this case that I'm referring to? What is it a metaphor for? Okay, the potato is not the default, understand that. The potato is the blame. Everyone knows that Greece must default, but believe me, no one wants the blame for that inevitability, that eventuality. No one wants to be seen as the catalyst, the cause, the culprit of what's coming. And why? Because when it happens, it will instantly, irreversibly, cause severe economic and financial upheaval the world over. Okay, don't believe me? Okay, let's walk through it. When Greece defaults, it means the euro experiment itself was basically unsuccessful. The euro is one of the most widely used currencies for payment and trade settlement on Earth. Furthermore, when Greece leaves, dozens of major banks, many of which are German and French, who are already highly leveraged, will go down on their face. Remember tiny Hypo Bank in Austria? That tiny default on, say, $8 billion has brought down several larger banks in Germany already. And Greece is Hypo Bank times 50. Oh, and don't forget about the largest bubble on Earth, the bond bubble. Yes, if rates, which have already been extremely wonky this past week, requiring several central bank interventions to keep them in check, if they were to suddenly spike upward, governments that were considered a safe haven yesterday would be called a liability, an insolvent mess today. And more crucially, the interest rate swap derivatives tied to those bonds, numbering in the hundreds of trillions of dollars, would be in dire jeopardy. Not to mention the credit payouts that a Greek default would trigger in the credit default market derivative world. Spiking rates would also cause a severe revaluation, a downward revaluation in world equity markets. Now imagine the world's retirees living on fixed income, suddenly experiencing their life's work being vaporized. Imagine the chaos that will cause, and then imagine the ire and fury directed at those seen as responsible for the Greek default that caused it. So when, not if, Greece defaults, brothers, it will take down much larger banks, which will take down much larger nations, which will take down much larger derivative pools. Okay, the shadow banking world is 10, 20, even 50 times larger than the Earth's GDP itself per annum. No one knows how big it is because it's that big of a secret. Okay, but that's what's helping rig every market. Without this, without those derivatives, and without this shadow banking system, the system crashes and burns. When the OTC derivative market goes, the shadow banking world goes with it, along with every, quote, market, end quote, that you can name. Now, would you want humanity and history to blame you for that kind of fallout? Me neither. So now you see why Syriza did what it did. And also, you can understand why the IMF even allowed it. If Syriza had not done that, their administration personally would have shouldered the blame for the carnage that would already be transpiring. If the IMF had not allowed this farce, this absurdity to continue, then it would have been the one holding the potato. As we get more advanced in this game here, I believe that a referendum put to the Greek people becomes more of a likelihood by the day. Because with a referendum, you see, everyone can blame those Greeks and not a few particular political faces or a few banks. A referendum would be the ultimate passing of the buck, the ultimate passing of the potato, hopefully once and for all, for those involved. Now, no one wants to be holding this murder weapon when the curtain goes down. And remember, the potato isn't the default itself, it is the blame. The game will end. It must end. That part is written. But who will the world and history blame for it? That is yet to be determined, and I guess that both the IMF and Syriza figure that 750 million euros is a small price to pay to pass this potato on to the next chump. This is the Watchman signing off. Stay vigilant and bring the fight to them.